This is the Parthenon on the Acropolis of Athens, originally constructed in the 5th century BC, the golden age of ancient Greek civilization. Every inch of it adheres to the rigorous golden ratio. What appears to be a perfect horizontal and vertical structure is actually the result of precise optical corrections. The central part of the platform is 710 centimeters higher than its sides, and among the 8 columns on the facade, only the 2 middle ones are truly vertical. The columns tilt inward progressively toward the edges, with the outermost ones leaning in by approximately 78 centimeters. This design was necessary because a strictly rectilinear structure would appear distorted to the human eye when viewed from below, with the horizontal lines seeming to curve and the columns appearing to lean. Due to spatial perspective, adorned with numerous marble reliefs inside and out, the Parthenon exudes exquisite craftsmanship and the profound aesthetic sensibilities of ancient Greek artists. It is precisely for this reason that its silhouette was adopted by Rolls-Royce as the iconic hood ornament. This is the Rosetta Stone, dating back to the 2nd century BC. During the Ptolemaic dynasty of ancient Egypt, it bears inscription in 3 scripts: hieroglyphs, the sacred writing used by ancient Egyptians to communicate with deities; demotic, the common script of the Egyptian people; and ancient Greek, the language widely used by the ruling class at the time. The stone was carved to commemorate the first anniversary of Ptolemy V's coronation, filled with eulogies praising him and his father, Ptolemy IV. While its content is rather mundane, the parallel text in 3 scripts, especially the inclusion of ancient Greek, enable linguists to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs, a writing system that had been lost for over 2,000 years. This breakthrough brought to light a vast trove of previously unreadable ancient Egyptian documents, unlocking the door to the mysteries of ancient Egypt. Today, its name lives on in Apple's M1 chip, equipped Mac systems, where the Rosetta translation tool converts software written for legacy platforms into code that can be recognized and run on the new architecture. Both the Parthenon marbles and the Rosetta Stone now reside in a single building in London, a repository housing countless more treasures of human civilization. After the rise of Roman Empire, the Christian influence spread to Greece, and the Parthenon was converted into a big church around 6th century CE. All statues of Greek gods inside and outside the temple were all replaced with Christian crosses. In the 15th century, the Ottoman Turks defeated the Byzantine Empire. The Greece, including Athens, fell under Ottoman rule. Rooted in a nomadic warrior culture, the Ottomans showed little interest in the relics of this ancient civilization. The entire Acropolis was repurposed as a military barracks for Ottoman garrisons, and the Parthenon was once again transformed, this time into a mosque for the troops. In the late 17th century, during the 6th Ottoman-Venetian War, the Acropolis, with its commanding, easily defensible position, was used as an ammunition depot and suffered a devastating explosion that reduced the Parthenon to ruins. Venetian forces then bombarded the structure with cannons, destroying its roof entirely. By the 18th century, a trend emerged among the wealthy Europeans: the Grand Tour, a years-long journey across Europe undertaken by young men upon reaching adulthood, lasting up to 3 years. The pinnacle of this pilgrimage was Greece. Regarded as the spiritual birthplace of Europe, the first stop in Greece was, of course, the Acropolis of Athens. Standing amid the ruins of the Parthenon and the leaning of its turbulent history, these young travelers developed a desire to preserve Greek civilization. Their method of preservation, however, was to remove its artifacts and transport them back to their own countries. As more and more people joined in this looting, the already dilapidated Parthenon and Acropolis fell into further disrepair. Ironically, this decay attracted even more treasure hunters, who justified their actions by claiming that since the relics were destined to disappear anyway, they might as well be taken away. Most of the artifacts, seized under the guise of preservation, ended up in the underground black market cultural relics. The 19th century saw colonialism reach its zenith, led by the British Empire. European elites developed a fascination with collecting exotic artifacts from around the world, spawning a new breed of explorers and archaeologists. Over the course of a century, countless cultural treasures were shipped to Europe from their homelands through both legal and illegal means, making London the world's largest black market for stolen artifacts, a status that persists to this day. For extremist groups like ISIS and the Taliban in the Middle East, looting and smuggling cultural relics to London's black market remains a major source of funding. In the early 19th century, Lord Elgin, the British ambassador to Athens, had long coveted the ruins of Parthenon. He repeatedly petitioned local Greek officials and the Ottoman government in Constantinople for permission to remove the temple sculptures, but his requests were denied. Undeterred, he adopted a gradual strategy. First, he obtained permission to enter the Parthenon under the pretense of making copies, sending an Italian artist to sketch the statues. He then argued that he needed to get closer to create more accurate reproductions, securing approval to erect scaffolding inside the temple. In 1801, Elgin finally received a decree from Constantinople allowing him to remove stones bearing ancient inscriptions and human figures. He acted swiftly, stripping the Parthenon of nearly all its surviving marble carvings and shipping them back to Britain. However, in 1967, British historian Clare, a researcher at the University of London, published a groundbreaking study based on extensive archival work. She found no direct evidence in Ottoman records from that period authorizing Elgin to take the Parthenon sculptures. The decree, she concluded, referred to ordinary artifacts unearthed at the Acropolis site, not the masterful marble carvings from the Parthenon itself. By then, however, the damage was done. These sculptures, representing the pinnacle of ancient Greek artistic achievement, had been smuggled to Britain under the cover of a vague worded document. Before his death, Elgin sold and donated the collection to the British Museum, where they remain on display to this day as Elgin marbles, a major draw for visitors for over 200 years since their removal. The Elgin marbles have been a persistent source of tension in UK-Greece relations. Successive Greek governments and the Greek public have never ceased their calls for the marble's return, but the British Museum has consistently insisted that it acquired them illegally. In 2014, UNESCO sent formal letters to the British Foreign Secretary, the Secretary of State for Culture, and the Director of the British Museum, urging the UK to initiate negotiation with Greece for their repatriation of marbles. The British government ignored the request entirely. Hardwick Fisher, the former director of the British Museum, went even further, stating outright that Greece is not the rightful owner of the sculptures. He then offered to loan them to Greece for exhibition, but only on the condition that Greece formally recognized British Museum ownership. Left with no other options, Greece built the Acropolis Museum on the slopes below the ancient ruins. Inside, fragments of Parthenon sculptures found at the site have been painstakingly restored using plaster casts and displayed in empty spaces, waiting for the day when the original marbles can return home. The museum's director says, "I'm sure we will see them back, but I don't know when." Like Greece, Egypt was incorporated into the Ottoman Empire following its rise. In the late 18th century, Napoleon Bonaparte launched his expedition to Egypt. As part of his colonial strategy, he brought along over 100 scientists, including engineers, mathematicians, and archaeologists. In 1799, French troops arrived at the Rosetta Fortress near the Nile Delta while searching for building materials to reinforce the fortress. Soldiers discovered the stone inscribed with 3 scripts and reported their find to a French engineer accompanying the expedition. Recognizing the stone's significance, the engineer preserved it. Over the next 2 years, the French expedition connected a vast array of Egyptian artifacts, including mummies, encompassing nearly all the finest treasures of ancient Egypt. In August 1801, the Ottomans sought help from the British Empire. The Royal Navy sailed to Egypt, and the Anglo-Ottoman forces defeated the French at Alexandria, bringing an end of Napoleon's campaign. French signed a surrender treaty, under which all Egyptian artifacts connected by the French expedition was classified as public property to be disposed of by the Anglo-Ottoman Alliance. British General Hutchinson declared that these items belonged to the British Crown. and the entire collection was loaded onto Royal Navy ships and transported to Britain. In 1802, the Egyptian artifacts arrived at the port of Portsmouth. They were presented to King George III, who then ordered them transferred to the British Museum. This acquisition made the British Museum's Egyptian collection one of the largest and the most prestigious in the world, rivaling and in some respects surpassing that of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Today, when Egypt demands the return of its cultural heritage, the British Museum offers the same refrain. It acquired the artifacts eagerly, as they were a gift from the British king. As for whether the king's own acquisition of these treasures was legitimate, the museum argues that the issue is too complex and distant in history to be reduced to a simple yes or no. When a National Geographic reporter posed a provocative question, what if, just say if, Egyptians had invaded Britain 200 years ago, found massive stones like Stonehenge, carted them back to Egypt, and Egyptian scholars had discovered their significance, would Britain not be right in asking for their return? The museum's response cycled back to the same issue of ownership, since they cannot fathom the mindset of civilization with thousands of years of historical heritage. By the late 19th century, the Qing dynasty was in terminal decline. Western explorers and archaeologists flocked to China, eager to exploit the situation. The two opium wars not only forced China to open its doors to foreign trade, triggering a massive outflows of silver, but also marked the beginning of the largest scale loss of Chinese cultural relics in history. A significant portion of the artifacts looted during this period eventually ended up in the vaults of the British Museum. Stein is a figure of starkly contrasting reputations. To the British, he was a distinguished scholar, explorer, and archaeologist. Born in Hungary, he studied Orientalism in several universities across Europe before pursuing postdoctoral research in Oriental linguistics and archaeology in Oxford and Cambridge. In 1888, he was sent to teach at schools in India. Later, with funding from the British government, he embarked on a series of expeditions to Central Asia. To the Chinese, however, there is no debate. He was an outright cultural thief whose expeditions left indelible scars on China's historical heritage. Beginning in 1900, Stein made 3 successive trips deep into northwest China, following the routes described in Xuanzang's Great Town Records on the western regions. During his first expedition, he discovered the Nia ruins, known as the Jinjue ancient city, and carted away over a dozen horse-drawn carriages full of artifacts. As the first person to discover the Jinjue ancient city, he plundered nearly all of its most valuable relics, including more than 700 wooden tablets inscribed in Kharosthi, the official language of the ancient Jinjue kingdom. This is a script that inspired the fictional Ghost Cave script in the popular novel Ghost Blows Out the Night. Kharosthi was also the writing system used during the Maurya Empire, the golden age of Buddhism in India. Many of the tablets was official documents, some still sealed with clay and never opened before Stein's arrival. Their number far exceeded the total of all previously discovered Kharosthi materials worldwide, making them of immense scholarly value. A few years later, in 1906, Stein returned to China. Following his earlier route further east, he first visited the Lowland ancient city, a site discovered by the Swedish explorer Sven Hedin, and removed over 600 artifacts. He then proceeded to his primary destination, Donghuang, having heard reports of the discovery of the library cave there. Stein headed straight for the Mogao Grottos, where he encountered Wang Yuanlu, the Taoist monk who guarded the cave. Wang had accidentally discovered the library cave in 1900. Local authorities had ordered him to guard the artifacts on site, forbidding their removal or sale. Stein, a Westerner with little command of Chinese, was initially denied access to the grottos by Wang. With the help of his translator and assistant, Zhang Shaoyou, Stein discovered that Wang was deeply interested in the Tang Dynasty monk Xuanzang. Seizing on this, Stein fabricated an identity as a devout follower of Xuanzang, telling Wang, centuries ago, Master Xuanzang brought scriptures from India to China. His spirit has entrusted these texts to you. Now, as a follower of Xuanzang from India, I have come to fulfill his wish by taking these scriptures back to their homeland. This ruse worked perfectly on the illiterate monk. who opened the doors of library cave to Stein in exchange for a small sum of money presented as a donation for the restoration of Mogao grottos. Stein carted away over 9,000 Dunhuang artifacts over the course of his 3 expeditions to China. Stein looted more than 10,000 cultural relics from northwest China. A large portion of these treasures now lie hidden in the Stein Room at the British Museum, a storage space closed to the public. In the decades of upheaval that followed, from Stone Age to Ming and the Qing dynasty, over 10,000 artifacts spanning China's 5,000 history, including pottery, bronze, calligraphy, paintings, sculptures, porcelains, and murals, were transported to Britain through various channels. These items now form the core of the British Museum's collection of over 20,000 Chinese artifacts. It is possible to single out a single most famous piece, as the collection is filled with national treasures, representing nearly every category of Chinese art and every era of Chinese history. Shan Jixiang, former director of the Palace Museum in Beijing, has spoken on numerous occasions about the issue of cultural relic ownership. He notes, Chinese museums house very few foreign artifacts. This is because, throughout history, the Chinese nation has never stolen or plundered the cultural heritage of other countries. We have always pursued peaceful development. Therefore, the connections in Chinese museums are our own cultural treasures. In contrast, since its founding in 1753, the British Museum has relied on the British Empire's global colonial network. Explorers, connectors, missionaries, officers, and soldiers had transported countless artifacts from every corner of the world to London, expanding the museum's holding from fewer than 80,000 items at its establishment to over 8 million today. Notably, nearly all of its dozens of treasures of the collection are cultural relics taken from other countries. In 1897, British troops perpetrated a massacre in the Kingdom of Benin in West Africa before ransacking the royal palace, seizing a vast number of bronze and ivory sculptures. These artworks were shipped back to Britain. Some became private collections of British officials. Others were sold by the Colonial Office, the department tasked with protecting and expanding British overseas interests, to museums across Europe and the United States, and more than 700 pieces ended up in the British Museum storage. In 1868, Captain Richard Powell of the British Royal Navy frigate HMS Tapes landed on Easter Island without obtaining permission from the island's indigenous inhabitants. He loaded one of the massive Moai statues onto his ship and brought it back to Britain as a gift for Queen Victoria. Major General Charles Stewart of the British East India Company Army, who referred to himself as a spiritual Indian, looted a bronze statue from an India temple. Upon his death, he was buried in India, and his collection was shipped back to Britain for auction. During the invasion of China by the Eight-Nation Alliance, admonitions of the instructress of the Palace Ladies, the earliest surviving copy of this famous Chinese painting was stolen by Captain Johnson of the British Cavalry Regiment stationed at the Summer Palace. The culturally ignorant officer sold the painting to the British Museum for a mere £25 after returning to Britain. According to Johnson's daughter, her father claimed he had rescued a noblewoman during the chaos, who had given him the painting as a token of gratitude. In reality, the painting had been stored in the Summer Palace, where Johnson was stationed, by the Empress Dowager Cixi. The British Museum is just one of many institutions in the UK housing looted Chinese cultural relics. Others include the British Library, another major repository of Dunhuang artifacts, the Fitzwilliam Museum at the University of Cambridge, the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford, and the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. The majority of these artifacts were looted during the century between Opium War and the founding of Republic of China, as foreign power invaded China, and Britain was only one of these invading powers.